Chapter 11. This chapter is entitled Supply Chain Management, but it really focuses on procurement or purchasing, at least some basics of purchasing. So in this particular chapter, we're going to talk about the importance of supply chain, some supply chain strategies, and some opportunities and issues. We want to maximize the value to the customer. That should be fairly obvious. In fact, some books are now referring to it as value chain rather than supply chain. And the difference is that value chain, the least the definition that I've seen, includes things like accounting. You need to have accounting to bill your customers. Does it add value? In some ways, it can. And so it's really, we're talking about everything as a system, not just individual parts, like is what it used to be. So competition, as you can see in the bold, is no longer between companies, it's between supply chain of companies. A lot of companies get their products out of China these days. A few years ago, Target tried to enter the Canadian market, was unsuccessful. It cost them billions of dollars. And the biggest reason they failed is they couldn't get their supply chain right. They struggled. And they're a very large American company with, and very successful in the United States. And they couldn't get their supply chain right in Canada, even though they planned it for quite some time in advance. And it cost them billions of dollars. So it was all about supply chain and not doing it correctly. So just some highlights of this, some activities, transportation / logistics, even how you collect cash and transfer cash. Talking about your suppliers, your distributors, accounts payable and receivable, inventory, order fulfillment, forecasting. A lot of these topics we've already had in the course. So in this particular case, reliance on your supply chain means more risk. So then where there are trade disputes between, say, Canada and China, or the EU, the European Union, then that puts your supply chain at risk because it's now a global supply chain for a lot of organizations. Ethics, we've talked about before. So ethics in the supply chain, ethical behavior. This is actually an area that people in industry, when they were helping develop a supply chain program, talked about this, and lack of ethics. It's an issue in supply chain, and I've mentioned it before in earlier lectures, so I'm not going to go on and on about it, but it's about people taking things or doing things that are unethical, and they have access, supply chain people have access to the resources or the assets of a company that the regular population doesn't. Some of the principles, justice or fairness with whom you deal, perceived impropriety. One of the rules I use is I tell my boss everything. And if I'm doing something wrong, then he will tell me, you shouldn't be doing that, stop it, okay? Or don't do it before you stop it or start it. All right, conflicts of interest, and using information from one company to the advantage of another. Influence, so like using your power, your influence. You have responsibilities to your employer to act ethically. Relationships with your customers. You do not take advantage of your customers or suppliers, and they should not be taking advantage of you. These days, number 6, sustainability and social responsibility. Designing your products for minimum amount of energy consumption and minimal amount of waste. Confidential information. We are not, when I first started teaching, we could post students' marks on the door as long as there was, say, their student number. We don't do that anymore. And we haven't done that for probably 15 years because it's confidential information. Reciprocity. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Laws and regulations, certain things that were illegal not that long ago are now legal or become illegal. So those are things, I read a definition one time, everything that's illegal is unethical, but not everything that's unethical is illegal. So taking advantage of somebody might just be unethical, but it may not be illegal. It may cross into being illegal. So when you have crisis, like a earthquake or tornadoes or floods and stuff, sometimes organizations will jack up the prices for bottled water or things like that. And there's always outrage when that happens. Professional competence, you expect, and I would expect of you as students to act in a professional way. It's in your course outline. And you would expect me to act in a professional and competent manner. So percentage of the supply chain as percentage of the sales, you can see that overall it's over 50% at 52. You can see that petroleum / oil and gas is almost 80%. And even food, 60% of your food is, you say, what is even like a bottled water? Why is this so expensive? Well, it's much more than the bottle and the water inside. It's moving it, transporting it, making sure that it's filtered properly, all of those kind of things. Outsourcing, where you get outside vendors. In the case of the schools, they will hire contract employees to teach certain courses. Advantage of that is once the course is over or once the project's over, you don't need them and the contract ends. And this happens in the publishing field quite a bit. And where publishers will hire what is called subject matter experts to develop material for them. And when the contract is over, like test bank questions and stuff like that, the contract's over and so it's been outsourced. And they do that all the time. If you have many suppliers, you typically can base your purchasing on price, which is not always a good thing. And it's like having many friends, but no one or two really good friends. You may not have that relationship with them to do like those extra things you need. Like, let's say that you've overindulged and it's 2:30 in the morning and you realize I shouldn't be driving my vehicle home or I have no way to get home. There may be certain people in your life that you can contact, but you need to have a close relationship with those people and they will come and get you and make sure you are safe. And you do that with fewer suppliers. The trend is to have fewer suppliers, but stronger relationships. About in around year 2002, somewhere around there. Anyways, over 15 years ago, I did some work for a corporation. I presented this concept. It's nothing new. And they almost laughed me out of the room. The reason why I bring it up is I take my students on tours of that company. And about 5 years ago now, so a good 10 years after I went and did some training there, one of the people who was laughing at me in the room stood up in front of my class and said, we need to develop and have good relationships with our suppliers. As the saying goes, it's a good thing I was sitting down because I would have fallen over. Like, there's been a change to build good relationships with suppliers. And you'll do things with the suppliers for when you have good relationships. I'll give you a quick example. Years ago, when I was a nursing home administrator, the Saskatchewan government said all eggs served in a nursing home must be candled. What that meant is, and in today's world, they don't use candles. They put up intense light behind the egg to see if there's any dark or discolored spots within the eggs. Those machines back then were like $700. We received our eggs from one of the ladies who ran a farm, and they did not candle. We were the only customer that required eggs to be candled. It's very rare that an egg actually has a defect, but I said, you're going to have to start to candle your eggs. So she asked me 2 questions. First question, she says, I'm going to have to charge you an extra 3 cents a dozen or something like that. I said, fine. But the second question is related to what we're talking about. She said, we're willing to buy the piece of equipment. And okay, you're agreed to a slight increase in the price, but I want you to assure me that you're going to continue to buy from us because you're the only customer who requires us to candle the eggs. And I said, you have our assurance. She just simply took our word on it that we would continue to buy from her next week and the week after and the week after. Because if I couldn't give her that assurance, she said, I'm sure she would have turned to me and said, sorry, you're going to have to find somebody else to supply your eggs. And so they were willing to go to that extra effort to do that. And yes, we were going to be charged a bit more money, but we were assuring them there would be a long-term relationship so they could get their money back. And that's no different than Toyota has the same kind of relationships with their suppliers. So the suppliers would say, okay, we'll go and invest $1 million in this piece of equipment, but we want assurance from you that you're going to continue to buy from us for the next 3 years or whatever length of time it is. Right. Bullwhip effect is where unpredictability causes increase in the amount of cushion or reserve that you have. So if a retailer predicts their sales but says, ooh, maybe I should bring in an extra 1. Well, their suppliers have more than one retailer. They have 10 retailers, and they may be bringing an extra 7 because of uncertainty. So think about this. If you go out in the evening, you have a go to see a movie or out for dinner. You have a fairly good idea how much money it's going to cost. But you might want to have a little bit extra just in case something happens, right? So you can make sure you can get home. Or the prices are a little different than you thought, whatever. Now, what if you go away for a week? Well, now I've got a week of uncertainty. So it's along that lines. What happens with the bullwhip effect, though, is it goes upstream. And by that, I mean it goes from the retailer up the stream to the people who are the manufacturers, the distributors, wholesalers, all the way backwards or upstream, so that everybody pads. And so there's a lot of extra inventory in the system because of that. VMI is used, vendor managed inventory is used. I know for a fact that at Walmart, the only vendor that they quote trust to manage the inventory on a Walmart shelf, if it's done by Procter & Gamble, Procter & Gamble does VMI. Procter & Gamble manages the products on the Walmart shelves, not Walmart. All the other products on a Walmart shelf that are managed by, their inventory is managed by Walmart themselves. The only company that's allowed to do VMI is Procter & Gamble, because they are considered to be one of the absolute best, if not the best, when it comes to retail. They really know their stuff. And so there are limits of too little, too much, all of those kind of things. But it's managed by Procter & Gamble in a Walmart store. Distribution, trains, planes, and automobiles, trucking, railroads, different types of products are sent in different ways. Obviously, cars can't be sent in certain ways. So big, heavy loads are usually by rail. And then you would move the car from a truck, from the rail to the truck when you need to bring it to the actual dealership, because the dealerships don't have the rail lines right beside them. And that's actually called piggyback. Air freight, waterways, pipelines, obviously oil and gas is transferred by pipelines, etc. Third-party logistics is simply what Amazon does. Amazon doesn't have its own fleet. Amazon hires companies to deliver the product that when you order from an Amazon, they will have another company ship it to you. And they have a whole list of companies. Canada Post, Dynex, a whole bunch of companies are their providers. So that Walmart does not do their own logistics. They have other companies who are in the business of delivering product to customers' doors. And you need to look at the cost of shipping. Faster shipping tends to be more expensive, and you need to evaluate the trade-off, because the faster you ship it, the more it reduces your inventory. So if you only need 2 days supply, because you get your product replenished in 2 days, you have less inventory than if it's 7 days. So if it's 7 days, you have to have 7 days of inventory, because it takes 7 days to replace. If it only takes 2 days to replace, now you only have to have 2 days of inventory, so you save 5 days of inventory. And we'll go through a calculation or two on that when we go through the examples. And here's a calculation of what I was just talking about. So this company, the annual holding costs are 40% of the times the product value, which is $1,750. You turn it into a daily rate, because the second courier is 1 day faster at $20 more. You can see that when you do the calculation, 1 day less inventory will save you $1.92. Since the holding costs of product, holding the product 1 day longer is $1.92, but it's not worth it. To speed up the delivery will cost us $20. What will that save us? $1.92. You're not going to spend $20 to save $1.92. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense for you on a personal basis, or certainly on a business basis. And we'll do those calculations by hand in the examples. Thank you for listening.